When you're living too fast and too hard, your senses become diminished and you're just like slamming through life. You're like a locomotive. But when you come back to being a noticer, you start to see and smell and taste and feel again. And I think that's what it means to really savor.
I am so delighted to talk to you because somebody shared first present over perfect with me and it changed my life. I really adjusted a lot of things, and you so beautifully put into words the feelings I think a lot of us have. So could you tell us a little bit about how you got into the hustle mindset and then how you shifted?
Well, I grew up in a Midwestern kind of high achieving, busy suburb, where you're thinking about college the second you start high school and you're thinking about your extracurriculars and you're like responsible young adults. And I grew up in, I would say, a pretty pressurized environment. And then I would say I also brought a lot of my own pressure to that. And so by the time I hit my mid 30s, I had been working full time for a long time. I was having my second child, and it was like every year things got a little faster, and every year I pushed a little harder, and every year I put a little more on my shoulders, and the pain and the pressure of it became so great that I realized I'm not actually the person I want to be anymore. I've become a different kind of person. And if we had met for coffee all those years ago and you said, like, what matters most to you? I would have said, oh my gosh, I'm such a like family and people and connection and joy and life and making memories. But if you looked at my life, I was absolutely exhausted and increasingly isolated. And so I was forced to realize that like what I said that I wanted for my life was not true for the life I had created for myself.
I think so many of us are in that same boat. What led you to have the realization that you were on one track that was sort of out of alignment with your values?
I wish I could say that like at the first sign of trouble, I paid attention and remade my life. If I could go back to that season, one of my greatest regrets is how many kind of flashing yellows I pushed through until it got to like screaming red. I was sick a lot. And I cried a lot in like weird, unexpected bursts. And I canceled things that sounded really fun. And then in the moment, I just couldn't do them. And I stopped being able to like really feel and taste my life. I was always on to the next thing or stuck in the last thing. And things got worse and worse and worse and worse. Um, until I had a moment in a hotel room in Dallas where I was speaking at an event, and I laid down. I had to speak at several sessions all in the same day. And I went up during lunch and I laid on the bed fully dressed, my shoes on, and I said, if anybody else would like to try to live this life that I've created for myself, they're welcome to it, but I don't want it anymore.
Wow.
And I came home and I had a series of conversations. Essentially, looking back on it, I was asking permission from people in my life, like, hey, I'm off track, and would it be okay with you if I made some major changes? And instead of them saying, well, I guess, I mean, they were like, thank God, because we've been watching you and this was not a sustainable path. They did not need me to be massively productive. They wanted me to be a person who could listen, who could laugh, who could walk through life in a connected, gracious way. They didn't care like how many things I was getting done in a day. It was to the detriment of my relationships, even though it seemed so important to me at the time.
So you had that striking realization, which is very evolved, I think, because I know being kind of on the hamster wheel myself, it's very hard to step back and have that realization. How did you then go about rebuilding the type of life that you wanted to have?
It was very gradual and it took a long time, and I got it wrong a lot. So it wasn't like an amazing before and after. It was like before and after, and then before and before and after and after and after. And one thing that did really help me though was talking about it with people, because then they can help reflect back to you when you're getting back off course. So I
Mm-hmm.
said, to my husband, to my parents, to our small group, to my best friends, um, I'm going to try and kind of dismantle and rebuild a way of living. and it's going to be weird and it's going to be messy. I'm going to get it wrong, but feel free to talk with me about this because I want to recover what I think are the best parts of myself, and I'd love your help to do it. So then it felt like a team as opposed to a fight.
I love that so much. What do you think was at stake if you had stayed on the trajectory you were on versus your course correction?
My physical health was really, really depleted. Um, I think I would have missed even more of my kids' little years. My marriage was increasingly um, kind of ships in the night. Um, and the other thing I think when you do any kind of creative work, especially in like kind of a freelance kind of way, it's very easy to just keep saying yes to everything. And it's very easy for people to get used to you being the person that always says yes, right? And
Yes.
I was that person for lots of the different teams that I was on. She's the one who will never miss a deadline. She'll never say no. She'll never not show up. And the more you say yes, the more people expect you to say yes. And I realized that I was heading very much in that direction. But I don't know anyone who does their best creative work when they're exhausted or burnt out or depleted or empty. And so I think I knew if you're ever going to do good work again, this is the moment to walk back. You need to make some major changes to become a person who lives a deep life, not just a fast life.
Yeah. I'm experimenting with this right now, and my husband will say to me, schedule downtime. But as soon as I have downtime, I literally don't know what to do with myself. So I said, what does it actually mean to have downtime? Does it mean I'm just sitting in a room by myself doing nothing? I don't even know. And so I wondered if anyone else is in the same boat. If you could describe for us what having room in our lives feels like to you.
That's a great question. And I remember one of the things I started to do was schedule silence into my life. And it felt real like I hated it. And it felt scary. And a lot of times I would cry and I would set the timer on my phone and I would think it's been like 15 minutes and it'd been like 3. I mean, I was like the most remedial case on this. But one thing that you'll find is, in my experience anyway, at first it's really hard. Silence is hard, downtime is hard. It feels like you're doing something wrong. Your mind starts running. Sometimes the guilt starts creeping in. It's very disorienting. And so you think like, I should probably just go back to work so these feelings go away. Over time, you break through the bad part of it and it starts becoming this really familiar, wonderful place where you start to find like restoration and joy and peace. And you start realizing, wait a minute, have other people been living like this? That's amazing. I want that. And I think some of it, again, this sounds so remedial, but I really needed it. So like instead of approaching your downtime with like, so I'm supposed to take 30 minutes and like do nothing, set yourself up today for tomorrow's downtime with a list of things that might feel good. Is there a novel that you love? Is there a book of poetry you want to read? Do you like to draw? Would cooking in a leisurely way feel restorative? Would you like to go for a walk? Whatever your own list is, so that when the downtime comes, you're not like, well, this stinks. You start to kind of build a toolbox of things that feel restorative. I feel like I've had enough years of learning this where now I know. I mean, my family knows like, hey, mom, do you want to just like read a book for a minute? For me, that's the go-to. 10 minutes of reading and everything, or being outside for me is really, really important. So as you start to get to know your own ways of restoring yourself, you'll start to build that toolbox, and then downtime starts to become really easy and fun as opposed to like, this feels crazy.
You describe moments of savoring life so beautifully. And I wonder if you have additional tips for how we can cultivate that attitude of savoring those moments.
One of my favorite authors forever and ever, kind of like my guide, my patron saint, is Anne Lamott. And one of the things I love about her is whenever you hear her speak, she says, whenever someone asks me to give a speech, they say either tell me everything you know about writing or tell me everything you know about faith. And the joke's on them because it's the same thing. So one of my core writing tips is actually one of my core like life practices, and it's the same thing. So when I'm in writing mode, essentially what you're trying to do as a writer, being a writer is about being a noticer. It's about seeing the things that you might not otherwise see. So when I'm in writing mode, I challenge myself at the end of every single day to at least write down three things, three sense-oriented details from the day. This is how the sky looked when I walked outside first thing in the morning. This is how my son's voice sounded when he was singing and he didn't think I could hear him. This is how my friend's eyes were shining when she was telling me that hard thing about her life. This is how the rosemary smelled when I was chopping it to put in whatever. Um, so what you're doing there is you're saying, I choose to believe that the details of our lives matter. And I choose to believe that sense is a really important way to connect with the world. Everything you can hear, touch, smell, taste. And so as a writer, writing them down, the first night you might be like, oh, I only really have thought of two. The next day it's easier. But 2 weeks in, you're like, I am smelling and tasting everything in this whole world. And life is the same way, not just as a writer. So if you could start every morning or end every day by noticing some of those moments, you'll find that you become a noticer of moments. And to me, that's probably the core of my spiritual practice or discipline, noticing the beauty of the world that God created and the people that he created. And that's why pace and exhaustion matter. Because when you're living too fast and too hard, your senses become diminished and you're just like slamming through life. You're like a locomotive. But when you come back to being a noticer, you start to see and smell and taste and feel again. And I think that's what it means to really savor.
If there's one thing that you'd like the world to know that you could share, what would that thing be?
It sometimes feels to me like there's such a specific script for how we're all supposed to live, right? This is what you're supposed to be like. This is what you're supposed to care about. This is what your house should be like. This is what your parenting should be like. I think there are so many right ways to build a meaningful life. And I'm in an age now where I don't care what someone else wants for my life. I want to live true to my own values, to what my family desires, and we get so much more authority and agency over our lives than we sometimes think we do. And our life has changed a million ways in the last couple of years. Like we lived in the suburbs, then we lived in Manhattan, and now we live in this tiny cottage in the woods, and they're all good ways to live. And there's no one right way. And we get to decide, and you don't have to do the same thing forever, but you don't get 200 years to figure it out, right? So if there are things that you love, if there are things that bring you life, if there are things that bring you delight or deep meaning or great joy, build your life around those things, because we don't get that many chances to rebuild our lives, right? But it's worth making those choices now. It's worth figuring out what you love. It's worth figuring out a relational circle of people who really care about you and want what's best for you. It's worth leaving a lot of things behind. All the hard changes are worth it to craft a life that you believe in.
Shauna, that's so encouraging. Thank you so much for speaking with us. And thank you for your work, which, you really share from the heart some of your struggles. And I feel like it's an invitation to the rest of us. So it's been deeply meaningful in my life. And I'm so excited to share this interview with other people. So thank you for the work you do. And thank you for your intentionality in the way you live.